The city of Elmridge woke up slowly each morning, as if it was too tired to face another day. The sky was always gray, the air always heavy with the smell of old rain and engine smoke. At the heart of it all stood St. Helens Hospital, a tall, square building with broken elevators and flickering lights. People called it the last door, because many who entered didn't leave the same. Inside, the night shift dragged like thick mud. Danielle Carter stood beside a sink in the surgical wing, her hands moving on their own as she wiped down the counters. Again and again. She'd lost count of how many times. The steel was already clean, but she needed something to do, anything to keep from thinking too much. She was wearing the same uniform she'd worn yesterday, and probably the day before that, too. Her shoes were soaked through. Her back ached. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun that kept falling apart. She hadn't slept in 3 nights. Behind her, a monitor beeped from one of the rooms. She didn't look. That wasn't her job. She wasn't a nurse, not even close, just a cleaner. A shadow in the corner. Invisible. Replaceable. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't need to check it. She already knew. Another overdue bill. Another final warning. Another cold reminder that her time was running out. Danielle finished the shift and stepped outside just as the sun broke through the clouds. She blinked against the light, climbed into her old rusted car, and drove the 15-minute stretch back to her apartment in silence. No music. No thoughts. Just exhaustion. The apartment building sat at the edge of a narrow street filled with potholes. The windows were covered in dust. Trash bins overflowed by the sidewalk. She parked and sat there, staring up at the chipped paint and broken bricks of the place she called home. She didn't want to go in, not because of what was inside, but because of what wasn't. No comfort. No peace. Just more problems. Still, she climbed the stairs, each step screaming beneath her weight. Inside, her son Eli, only 14, sat wrapped in a blanket on their old couch. His skin was pale, his frame thin. His phone rested in his lap, but his eyes lit up when she entered. "Morning, Mom," he said with a tired smile. "Hey, baby," Danielle replied, forcing herself to smile back. "How are you feeling?" He shrugged. "Same." But she saw the pain behind his eyes. Eli had sickle cell anemia, a disease that turned every day into a fight. Some days he had enough energy to smile. Others he could barely breathe. Today was one of the hard ones. Danielle crouched and kissed his forehead. "Your medicine?" He pointed to the coffee table, where a nearly empty bottle stood like a cruel joke. "Last one was last night," he said quietly. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her bank account was empty. She didn't need to check to know. And the refill cost money she didn't have. Just then, her 9-year-old daughter Maya walked into the room barefoot. Her curls were wild from sleep, and she rubbed her eyes with tiny fists. Without a word, she climbed onto the couch beside her brother and leaned against him. Danielle's chest tightened. They deserved so much more. After a silent breakfast of dry cereal and warm milk, Danielle kissed them goodbye and left for her second job. Cashier at a convenience store that smelled like burnt coffee and mop water. She stood for 8 hours, scanning items, smiling at strangers, pretending everything was fine, but her body hurt. Her soul hurt more. At the end of her shift, she checked her phone in the break room. Her heart dropped. An official message from the landlord. The building had been sold. They had 30 days to leave. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Danielle sat alone at the small kitchen table. It was covered in bills, overdue notices, shut-off warnings, medical forms she couldn't bear to open. She picked up her phone and scrolled through rental listings. One in $200. One out in $400. One in $600, all out of reach. Each ad felt like a slap. Credit checks, deposits, income requirements she couldn't meet. Her emergency fund, just $850 saved over a year, wouldn't even cover a deposit. Her thumb hovered. She kept scrolling, kept looking. Most of the house listings were far beyond what Danielle Carter could ever imagine affording. Each post screamed luxury. Polished wood floors, shining countertops, staged couches with throw pillows that looked untouched. But the prices? They made her chest tighten. Tens of thousands of dollars. Some needed cash offers. Others required pristine credit. She almost gave up. Almost closed the page until her finger stopped on one listing, something that looked out of place like an old photo in a modern gallery, Everwood House. 46 Willow Drive. Starting bid, $750, vacant for over 4 decades. Significant structural damage. Sold as is. No utilities. There was one blurry image attached, a 2-story farmhouse. White paint faded to gray, windows covered with wooden boards. Weeds swallowed the fence and porch. It looked abandoned, maybe haunted, but it had land. It had walls. It had a roof. Danielle blinked hard, staring at it. Her breath caught in her throat. A sound echoed in her head, her grandmother's voice, long gone but never forgotten. Sometimes, child, you got to lose everything to finally win. Chloe would have rolled her eyes. Girl, this ain't a movie. That house looks like it'll fall if you breathe on it too hard. But Chloe didn't. Know what it felt like to sit at a kitchen table counting pennies while your son's medicine bottle ran empty. She didn't know the panic of being a few weeks from sleeping in a car. Danielle stayed up most of the night, reading, rereading, staring at that photo like it might change into something better. She made her decision as the sun rose. The next morning, Danielle called in sick to both jobs. She ironed her least wrinkled blouse and found slacks that still fit from when she worked reception years ago. She braided her hair tightly, slipped on worn flats, and tucked the envelope of her life savings into her purse. It felt like carrying feathers. The county courthouse was colder than she expected. The floors echoed with footsteps. The air smelled like paper and perfume. People in suits moved through like they owned the place. Danielle didn't belong. Not in this world of raised paddles and clipped laughter. But she sat at the back of the auction room, hands trembling. Bids flew like lightning, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. Her heart pounded harder with every shout. Then the auctioneer cleared his throat. Lot H27, Everwood House, starting bid, $750. Silence. Danielle's breath caught. No one moved. Do I have $750? Her hand rose before her brain could stop it. $750 from the lady in the back. Do I hear $800? A man in the front, rich-looking, polished, lifted a lazy hand. 800. Danielle's mouth was dry. She lifted her hand again. 850. 900, the man called, not even looking up from his phone. That was it. Every cent she had. The auctioneer's voice rang out, Do I have 950? Silence. The man looked up finally, shrugged. She can have it. Not worth the hassle. The gavel slammed. Sold to the lady in blue. Lot H27. Congratulations. Danielle sat down hard. Her heart felt like it was trying to escape her chest. She had just spent every penny she owned on a crumbling house no one wanted. The paperwork was a blur. The clerk didn't even look her in the eye. The Everwood place? The woman muttered, adjusting her glasses. That house has a history. Danielle didn't ask. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Later, she sat in her car, staring at the rusted key in her palm and the folded deed on the seat beside her. Her hands began to shake. She cried. Not because she was scared, though she was. Not because she was broke, though she truly was. She cried because for the first time in years, she owned something. It was broken, forgotten, faded, but it was hers. That afternoon, she picked up Eli and Maya from school. Eli looked pale and tired, dark circles like smudges under his eyes. Maya's curls bounced as she skipped to the car. Danielle smiled, wiping tears from her cheeks quickly before they saw. "Guess what?" she said. Her voice trembled. "We've got a home." Eli blinked. "Wait, what?" Maya tilted her head. "A real house?" Danielle nodded, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. They didn't understand yet, but they would. As they drove toward the far edge of town, the paved streets gave way to winding gravel paths. Trees lined the road like old guards. A rusty fence appeared ahead, half swallowed by ivy. The weeds made it hard to see, but there it was, the Everwood house. Maya gasped softly. "It looks like a storybook house." "A scary storybook," Eli muttered. The porch leaned slightly to the left. One shutter flapped lazily in the breeze. The yard looked like it hadn't been touched since her grandparents were young. Danielle parked and sat there for a moment, staring. Then she whispered, "Please, let this be the right choice." From the back seat, Maya leaned forward, her tiny fingers clutching the seat. "Are we going to live here?" Danielle forced a smile through the lump in her throat. "Yeah, baby, we are." She turned off the car. For a moment, they just sat there, staring. It looked empty. But it didn't feel that way. It felt like something inside had been waiting for them. As the last rays of sunlight vanished behind the trees, Danielle reached into her lap and picked up the rusted key. "Tomorrow," she thought. "Tomorrow, it all begins." That night, they didn't sleep inside the house. They tried. Danielle had led them up the creaking porch, the key trembling in her hand as she pushed it into the lock. The door resisted, groaning as it opened. A wave of thick, stale air rushed out like the breath of a sleeping giant disturbed. The smell hit them first: mold, dust, and something faintly sweet, like old fruit left to rot. The floorboards moaned beneath every step as they crept inside. The walls were cracked, the wallpaper peeling in long strips. The ceiling bowed slightly overhead. Their footsteps echoed eerily in the dark, and Maya clung tightly to her mother's side. Eli walked behind them, flashlight in hand, his breath shallow. They didn't get far. Just a quick look through the front room and kitchen. The air was too damp, too cold, the silence too deep. "We'll come back in the morning," Danielle murmured. Back in the car, they curled under a blanket in the back seat. 3 bodies, huddled close, exhaustion chasing away fear for a little while. It was not the homecoming she had imagined. The next morning, Danielle stepped out of the car and stared up at the house again. In full daylight, the place looked even worse. The paint had faded into a sickly gray, flaking off in brittle curls. Ivy wrapped one whole side like a greedy hand. A shutter hung by a single rusted hinge, swaying lightly in the breeze. The porch sagged so deeply in the middle it seemed to groan just from the sunlight. Danielle sighed, rolled up her sleeves, and looked back at her kids. Eli leaned against the car, arms folded across his chest. His face was pale, but his eyes were alert. Maya stood beside him, her backpack clutched tight like a shield. Danielle tried to smile. "It's going to take work," she said quietly. "But it's ours." That word echoed in her chest. Ours. She unlocked the door again, stepping inside with more resolve than the night before. They explored cautiously, room by room, trying to find a space that felt less broken. The kitchen was a disaster. The sink was rusted solid, and the cabinets hung crooked like broken jaws. But the pantry, tucked behind the kitchen, had 4. Solid walls, a relatively dry floor, and no visible holes in the ceiling. It would do for now. They brought in their few bags, sleeping mats, and a pair of folded blankets. The pantry became their first little camp, their island of safety. Every step still creaked. Every gust of wind outside still sounded like a whisper, and more than once, Danielle caught Maya glancing up the staircase with wide, quiet eyes. Danielle gave them small jobs. Eli, despite his tiredness, helped carry light bags. Maya wiped off shelves with an old towel. They worked in silence, the sound of insects buzzing through the open front door, the heat already thick in the air. They didn't go upstairs. Danielle didn't even mention it. By noon, sweat ran down their backs and dust clung to their skin. The pantry had become their base, a makeshift home in a broken house. At one point, Danielle sat with Eli on the back steps, both of them staring, out at the wild yard. "It's better than I expected," Eli said softly. Danielle chuckled. "You're a terrible liar." "But it's still ours," he added, looking up at her. She reached for his hand and gave it a squeeze. That night, they slept inside, and the house, for the first time, held them. The following morning, Danielle and Maya stepped outside with a mission: to tame the yard, or at least carve a path through it. Grass reached their waists. Vines twisted through the old fence. They hacked and pulled, sweat dripping from their faces. Maya paused, staring at the wild tangle. "It feels like it's alive," she said. Danielle glanced down. "Maybe it is. But we're stronger." Then, snap! A sharp crack echoed from the edge of the fence. Danielle turned, eyes narrowing. A woman stood just beyond the weeds. Thin and wiry, with leathery skin, a floppy straw hat, and a cigarette hanging from her lips. "You the one who bought Everwood?" she called out. Danielle nodded slowly. "Yeah, just moved in." The woman took a long drag, then exhaled smoke through her nose. "That place has bones," she said. "Not wood. Bones. You should be careful." Before Danielle could respond, the woman turned and walked away, her shadow swallowed by the tall grass. Danielle stood frozen for a long time, the warning ringing in her ears. That night, after the children were asleep, Danielle sat at the kitchen window. The wind whistled through the broken frame. The stars blinked down like distant witnesses. The neighbor's words echoed again. Bones. She didn't believe in haunted houses. She believed in hard years, bad luck, and exhaustion. But tonight, the house felt less like a building and more like a question she hadn't asked. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard groaned. Danielle froze, listening. Silence. She wrapped the blanket tighter around Maya's small body and lay still. Sleep did not come. The third night, the house spoke. Not with creaks, not with groans. Through Maya. Danielle had drifted into uneasy rest, her arms curled around her daughter. Eli lay nearby, pale and quiet. It was Maya's hand that shook her gently. "Mom," she whispered. She was here again. Danielle sat up, blinking. "Who, sweetie?" "The lady, with flowers in her hair." Danielle's blood ran cold. "She was standing by the stairs," Maya continued. "She said, 'We can help her.'" Danielle's throat went dry. "You were dreaming, baby." Maya shook her head slowly. "She's real." Danielle said nothing, just pulled her daughter close. Outside, the trees rustled in the breeze. Inside, the silence returned. The next day, Danielle tried to push the unease away. She cleaned, scrubbed, tried to organize the chaos, but her thoughts kept drifting to Maya's words. While sweeping the hallway, her broom caught on something, a floorboard. It jutted slightly upward, warped from time. She knelt down, pried it back with her fingers. There, nestled beneath the wood, was a rusted tin box. Her heart jumped. She opened it. Inside were faded letters, curled photographs, and a small, leather-bound notebook. The photos showed a family, a tall man, a woman with wild curls and a flower in her hair, 2 kids. Danielle stared at it, her breath caught in her throat. The woman looked exactly like the figure Maya kept seeing in her dreams. Her hands trembled as she opened the notebook. Neat handwriting filled the pages. Notes on plants, symptoms, treatments, observations, lists. One phrase repeated again and again. For our son. Danielle pressed her fingers to the page. Something was here. Something forgotten, but not lost. By midday, the sun burned high in the sky, wrapping the air in a thick, wet heat that clung to every inch of skin. The house sat in silence, its bones groaning quietly in the heat. Danielle wiped sweat from her brow as she stepped outside, leaving Eli resting on a makeshift mat inside their pantry shelter. His face had looked pale all morning, and he hadn't eaten much, so she let him sleep. Beside her, Maya followed quietly, gripping a small hand rake almost too big for her fingers. The front yard was an unruly jungle. Tall weeds and thorny vines wrapped around everything like the house was being swallowed whole. Danielle tugged at a patch of stubborn roots near the porch, trying to carve out even the smallest clearing. The sun baked the back of her neck. Her hands were sore, but she didn't stop. "You okay, Mama?" Maya asked, her voice small under the weight of the heat. Danielle nodded, forcing a smile. "Just a little more, baby." As she reached for another patch of vine, a voice called out from the edge of the property. "You the one who bought the Everwood place?" Danielle turned quickly, startled. A thin, older woman stood just past the broken fence line, half shaded by a wide straw hat. Her skin was tanned and lined like old leather, and her eyes were sharp even from a distance. Danielle stood straight, brushing dirt from her hands. "That's right." The woman stared hard for a moment, then shook her head slowly. "Don't know why anyone would. That house, it's cursed." Danielle's stomach clenched. "I don't believe in curses," she said, but the woman had already turned and walked away. The smell of cigarette smoke hung faintly in the air long after she vanished. That night, after Maya and Eli were tucked in beneath the thin blanket, Danielle sat by the open window. The rusted frame moaned slightly in the breeze. Outside, the trees swayed in the moonlight, casting long, dancing shadows across the yard. Her neighbor's words echoed again. Cursed. She wanted to dismiss it, chalk it up to gossip and small-town stories. She didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in unpaid bills, hospitals that didn't listen, and a world that pushed too hard against people who had nothing left. And yet, the silence of the house pressed against her chest. The wind whispered like voices just out of reach. She closed the window and went to bed, but sleep never came. By the third night, something began to shift. Eli barely spoke. He moved slowly, cautiously, as if the air itself was too heavy to breathe. He stayed curled on his mat in the front room, sweating and silent, his skin gray with exhaustion. Danielle tried to keep the air moving with old hand fans and damp cloths, but the heat felt like it came from within the walls. The house held it, refused to let it go. Maya, on the other hand, seemed restless. She wandered the house during the day, peeking into dusty corners, touching doorknobs that wouldn't turn. Danielle often found her staring out the back window, at the thick overgrowth behind the house. One night, just after midnight, Danielle felt a small tug on her sleeve. "Mama," Maya whispered, her face close, her voice serious. "She came back." Danielle blinked awake. "Who, baby?" "The lady with the flowers, in her hair." She was standing by the stairs. Danielle sat up slowly. The house creaked faintly around them. She said, "We can help her." Danielle stared into Maya's wide, unblinking eyes. "You were dreaming." Maya shook her head firmly. "No, she was real." Danielle wrapped her arms around her and held her close, listening to the quiet breath of the house. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Danielle forced herself to focus on the physical. She made a long list of repairs, patching, holes, scrubbing walls, cleaning out debris. They had no electricity, no money, and barely enough tools. But she worked anyway, using borrowed supplies and salvaged wood she found in the back shed. Late that afternoon, while clearing out a narrow hallway near the rear of the house, her broom snagged on something beneath the warped floorboards. She knelt, fingers prying gently at a loose plank. Underneath, wrapped in dust and spider webs, was a bundle of old newspapers tied with twine. She sat down on the floor, brushing away grime from the yellowed pages. Her eyes caught the date. A chill ran up her spine. She flipped through the brittle, stacked carefully, scanning headlines about the Harper family. Missing, vanished without a trace. No foul play suspected. No leads. Danielle set the bundle aside, her fingers trembling. That evening, Eli sat on the back steps, sipping water. His face was drawn and tired. Danielle sat next to him, watching the garden sway beneath the sunset. "You feeling any better?" she asked gently. Eli gave a half shrug. "Maybe." He looked out toward the overgrown yard. "Maya keeps saying there's something out there." Danielle followed his gaze. The garden was wide and wild. Somewhere in the tangle of weeds and vines, she could barely make out the outline of a broken trellis. As the last light faded from the sky, Danielle turned back to the hallway she'd cleaned earlier. She swept slowly, distracted. Then, clink. Her broom hit something hard again. She crouched. Another board was loose. She pulled it back carefully. Beneath it was a small tin box, rusted but still intact. Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside were photographs, aged letters, and a worn leather notebook. She unfolded a letter. It was addressed to James and Evelyn Harper. The photos showed a tall man with soft eyes, a woman with wild curls and flowers tucked behind her ear, and two children. She flipped open the notebook. The handwriting inside was delicate, full of care. It wasn't a diary. It was research. Notes on plants, herbal mixtures, symptoms, dosages. One line appeared again and again, scribbled in careful ink. "For our son." Danielle's hand pressed against her chest. This wasn't just a forgotten family. This was something else, something important, and something unfinished. That night, Danielle couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, the notebook open. In front of her, letters spread across the cracked surface like scattered puzzle pieces. Her fingertips traced the ink, her eyes moving slowly over each note, each symptom, each plant. Who were these people? And what had they been trying to do? For our son. The phrase repeated in her mind like a drumbeat. She thought of Eli, his tired body, the constant hospital visits, the medications they could no longer afford. What if this was more than just notes? What if this was the beginning of something more? She heard the floor creak behind her. Maya stood in the hallway, silent, holding her small drawing notebook. She didn't say anything, just walked over and sat across from her mother. After a moment, she opened her book and showed Danielle a drawing. It was of the house, but not how it looked now. In Maya's sketch, the paint was fresh, the garden behind the house was bursting with flowers, and the windows glowed like they held warmth. Danielle's throat tightened. "Why do you draw it like that, sweetie?" she asked gently. Maya didn't look up. "Because that's how she shows it to me." Danielle's breath caught. She didn't ask who she was. She already knew. The next morning, after feeding Eli what little food they had left, some dry toast and weak tea, Danielle stepped outside. The sky was already warming with early sun, and the air smelled of damp grass and dust. She wandered toward the backyard garden. Vines climbed up rusted fencing. Dandelions and stinging nettle covered everything. But beneath the chaos, she began to see shapes, circular beds, paths, old rows of stone. It had once been a real garden, maybe even a special one. Danielle knelt beside a patch of half-dead lavender. Its scent still clung to the breeze. She remembered her grandmother's stories, how the old women in her family once healed with roots, leaves, and prayers. She closed her eyes and breathed deep. Maybe this garden wasn't just for show. That. Afternoon, while Eli rested again and Maya colored on the front steps, Danielle explored the old shed at the back of the property. It smelled like mildew and mice. But inside, she found old pots, broken tools, cracked jars of seeds, and a rusted wheelbarrow. She pulled everything outside into the sun and began cleaning what she could. With every dusty box and bent spade, it felt like the land was beginning to remember what it once was. In the evening, she kept reading the Harper notebook. Every page offered something new. One described how to boil certain leaves to help reduce fever. Another talked about binding wild honey with crushed herbs to calm coughs. And others felt deeper, like they were trying to protect something sacred for our son. The repetition kept her going. She started copying the pages into her own notebook, rewriting legible parts by candlelight. It felt like translating a language between centuries. Each word was a step closer to understanding. 3 days passed. Then Maya woke her in the middle of the night again. "Mama," she whispered, shaking her gently. "She said it's time." Danielle sat up, dazed. "What's time for?" "To find it." The next morning, Danielle packed a small trowel, a spoon, and a kitchen bowl into a sack. She walked with Maya to the center of the garden, past the twisted vines and dried flowers, until they reached the old apple tree that towered like a sleeping guardian. "This is the place," Maya said softly. Danielle crouched and began to dig. The soil here felt different, softer, warmer, almost like it wanted to be turned. After 20 minutes, her fingers hit something hard. She cleared away the dirt slowly. A small metal box lay beneath the roots. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, were more pages. Notes, drawings, a formula, a real one. That night, after Eli was asleep and Maya was curled beside him, Danielle opened the box again at the kitchen table. There were instructions, dosages, and details she barely understood. But it was all there. It wasn't just a garden, it was a cure, and it was waiting to be finished. She didn't know how yet. She didn't have the training or the equipment or the money. But she had the will. And she had the love, and sometimes that was enough to start a miracle. That night, after the children had finally drifted off to sleep, Danielle sat alone at the kitchen table. The only light came from the weak glow of a battery-powered lantern, flickering against the cracked walls. In front of her sat the leather notebook she had found buried under the floor. Beside it, a bundle of old newspapers, their pages yellowed with time and smudged with dust. She flipped through the brittle sheets carefully, afraid they might crumble in her fingers. The headlines were sharp, despite the age. Local black family. Vanishes without a trace, no leads in Harper disappearance, police close case, no foul play suspected. No arrests, just gone. Danielle swallowed hard. There was no emotion in the reports, just a cold dismissal. Like the family had never mattered in the first place. She turned her gaze back to the notebook. The handwriting inside was steady and precise. Notes on herbs, symptoms, dosages, strange plant combinations. It wasn't a diary, it was a mission. Page after page bore one repeated line written in looping script. For our son. A soft creak from the hallway pulled her attention. Her spine straightened, heart thudding. Slowly, she rose from her chair, moving toward the sound without a word. At the foot of the staircase stood Maya. The little girl's eyes were wide, glowing in the dim light. Her curls framed her face like a shadowed halo. She said, "We have to." "Finish it," Maya whispered. Danielle's breath caught. "Who, baby?" Maya turned her head slowly, eyes drifting toward the darkness above the stairs. "The lady with flowers." The house groaned softly, as though exhaling. And for the first time, Danielle wasn't sure they were truly alone. The next morning came heavy and slow. Danielle had barely slept, her dreams tangled with the image of Maya at the staircase and the whisper of unseen footsteps. The sunlight slipped through the gaps in the boards, casting striped shadows on the walls. She rose early, careful not to wake the children. The air felt thick and wet, clinging to her skin. Outside, cicadas buzzed in their constant summer song. Danielle poured water from a jug and splashed her face. As she wiped it dry, her eyes drifted back to the kitchen table. The newspaper bundle still sat there. So did the notebook. She sat and opened it again. The pages hadn't changed, but they felt different now, more urgent. There was something beautiful and desperate about the words inside, scientific notes written not with cold calculation, but with trembling love. May 1969. Our boy is weaker this week. The fever won't break. Evelyn says she dreams of him running free in the fields. I promised her we would find a way. I will not stop. Danielle's fingers trembled as she traced the line. Her mind flashed to Eli, how he always said, "I'm okay," even when his body betrayed him. How he winced in silence, trying not to worry her. She had said the same thing once. "I won't stop." Maybe that was why this notebook had found her. Later that morning, with both children awake and fed, Danielle loaded them into the car. She didn't have a clear plan, just a deep, gnawing need to understand. Maybe someone in town knew something. Their first stop was the small grocery store. As she pushed the cart down the aisle, she caught the cashier's eyes following them. A man in his late 50s, mustache thick and drooping like it carried the weight of his judgment. He said nothing, but his gaze clung to them like thorns. They left quickly. Outside, Danielle packed the groceries into the car trunk. The sun was hot, baking the asphalt beneath her feet. "You're the woman who bought the Harper place," a voice called from behind. Danielle turned. A weathered man leaned against a pickup truck, arms crossed, face shaded by a sun-bleached cap. His eyes were sharp, like he'd already made up his mind about her. "That's right," she replied. He shook his head slowly. "Wouldn't recommend staying out there. Bad things happened in that house." Before she could respond, he climbed into his truck and drove away. On the drive home, Eli sat quietly in the back seat, his head leaned against the window. "Everyone here looks at us like we don't belong," he said softly. Danielle gripped the wheel tighter. "That's because they don't want us to belong," she said. "But we're here anyway." The afternoon was heavy with heat when they returned. The air felt thick enough to chew. Danielle sent the kids inside and walked around the property. Her feet found an old path hidden beneath weeds and vines, leading her to the back of the house. There, beyond the tangle of wild plants, she found what remained of an old garden. Rows were almost invisible, eaten by time, but she could imagine it as it had once been, lush, living, a space of purpose and care. That night after dinner, she opened the notebook again. Her eyes lingered on the section about herbs. Some of the names she recognized: basil, rosemary, mugwort, things her own grandmother used to mention in hushed tones while preparing healing salves. Others were unfamiliar, but each had notes, symptoms, dosages, even sketches. This wasn't backyard tinkering. It was something more, something close to medicine, something close to a cure. Maya wandered into the room, her sketchpad clutched in her arms. She took a seat across from Danielle without saying a word and began to draw. Danielle looked up and froze. The sun hung lazily in the sky, its golden light stretching across the backyard of the worn-down Harper house. The garden behind it swayed with the soft wind, but most of it was hidden beneath vines, thorns, and weeds that had been left untamed for decades. Yet, in Maya's sketchbook, the garden was blooming. Flowers in every color, rows of vegetables, and a bright apple tree standing proud in the center. Danielle leaned over and watched her daughter draw. "Why do you always draw it like that?" she asked gently, wiping her hands on her jeans. Maya didn't lift her head. Her pencil kept moving. "Because that's how she shows it to me." Danielle blinked. "She?" "The lady with flowers in her hair," Maya answered as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "She says we can make it like that again." Before Danielle could respond, Eli's voice rang from the hallway. "Mom, there's someone outside." Danielle rushed to the front window, heart pounding. Just beyond the warped fence stood a man. He wore a dark jacket, odd for the summer heat, and a cap low over his eyes. The moment Danielle stepped onto the porch and called out, he turned and disappeared into the woods. Not a word, not a glance back. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of labor and quiet wonder. Danielle spent the mornings cleaning rooms and fixing whatever could be patched with her hands. She pulled nails from rotting boards, swept decades of grime from creaking floors, and uncovered furniture swallowed by dust. Eli, though frail, insisted on helping. He carried smaller tools and sorted through old boxes with care. Maya stayed close, to the garden, often humming soft tunes that Danielle didn't recognize. Each night, once the children were asleep, Danielle sat with the Harper family's old notebook spread before her. The pages held delicate handwriting and pressed herbs, each note a whisper from the past. It spoke of love, of healing, and of desperate attempts to save a sick child. The same herbs listed, mugwort, lavender, wild basil, were sometimes still growing wild along the fence line. Danielle started marking spots, wondering if the garden could be brought back, if there was still magic in the soil. The house had its own rhythm. It creaked and sighed in the night, like an old person settling into bed. Sometimes Danielle would wake, certain she had heard footsteps or faint voices, but when she rose, the halls remained empty. And yet, it didn't feel like they were alone. Not in a threatening way, but like the walls remembered, like the air held breath from those long gone. One evening, as she moved shelves in the back pantry, Danielle found a yellowed envelope wedged behind a loose board. It was addressed in careful script. "To whoever comes after us." With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was a single page. "If you're reading this, then our work is not done. This house holds more than dust and silence. It holds hope for our son, for anyone who needs healing. The garden knows. The house listens. Trust it, and listen too." Danielle pressed the note to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes, but not from fear. It was something else, a feeling she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. A strange, impossible hope. The next morning, she found Maya barefoot in the dewy grass. The sun had barely risen, and the yard was still quiet. "Maya, what are you doing out here so early?" Her daughter didn't turn around. She stood at the edge of the overgrown garden. "She says we need to fix it," she murmured. Danielle joined her, looking out at the twisted vines, the collapsed fence, the weeds rising taller than Maya herself. "It's a lot of work, but it's important," Maya said simply. And so, they began. With hands and clippers and sheer will, the three of them chipped, away at the wilderness. Eli joined when he could, moving slower but determined. They uncovered old stepping stones and bits of broken pottery. a rusted watering can, a bent trowel. At the center stood a massive apple tree, its bark knotted and branches thick with green fruit. Maya stood beneath it one afternoon, her eyes wide. "There's something here. I can feel it." That night, as Danielle sat on the porch watching fireflies dance, she felt something too. Possibility. The house was still falling apart. The town still looked at them like outsiders. Eli still got tired easily, but beneath the worry and exhaustion, something had shifted. The Harper house wasn't just shelter. It was waiting for them. It had chosen them. The next few days were hotter. The sun bore down with a fierceness that made the house feel like a furnace by midday. Danielle began waking earlier, sometimes before the birds, just to steal a few cooler hours. One morning, while checking the far side of the garden, she heard a sound she couldn't place, a deep creak, like a door swinging slowly open. She turned toward the house, but no door had moved. Inside, Eli was asleep on the couch, and Maya was sitting cross-legged near the pantry, sketching again. "You okay, sweetheart?" Maya looked up. "The house made a sound," she said. Danielle nodded slowly. "I heard it too." That night, as Danielle tried to sleep, the breeze carried the scent of wildflowers through the cracked windows, and beneath it, the faintest sound of humming. Not Maya. Not anyone she could see. A woman's voice, soft, familiar, and filled with longing. At the center of the tangled backyard, where weeds rose tall as a child and vines choked the wooden fence, the old apple tree stood like a skeleton from a forgotten world. Its twisted branches reached toward the cloudy sky like tired fingers, casting scattered shadows across the cracked, uneven ground. Maya stood beneath it again, silent, barefoot, her small hands hanging at her sides, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Danielle stood a few feet away, wiping dirt from her arms, watching her daughter with growing concern. These moments had become more frequent lately. Maya staring into space, talking to no one, listening like she was waiting on a voice carried only by wind. "Maya?" Danielle called gently. Without looking away from the tree, Maya answered. "She says it's here." Danielle felt her chest tighten. She didn't ask who. She already knew. Every clue, every scribbled note in the notebook, every old letter hinted at something hidden, something buried beneath the tree. The dreams Maya had been having. The lady with flowers in her hair, always whispering about something beneath the roots. Those weren't just dreams anymore. Danielle could feel it too now, the pull of something unspoken. She knelt beside her. "Daughter," let her fingers sweep across the dry earth. The ground felt different here, denser, compacted, as if something below had been sleeping for years. Her hand brushed against flat, cool stone. She cleared away the surface dirt, revealing small, smooth rocks forming a faint circle around the tree's base. A marker. That night, long after Eli had drifted to sleep on the old couch and Maya lay. Curled beneath a thin blanket on the kitchen floor, Danielle sat alone with the notebook open in front of her. The single bulb above the table buzzed softly, flickering now and then. She read the lines again. "They tried to bury what we built, but the roots grow deeper than they know." Her hands trembled as she closed the book. She didn't want to believe in ghosts or curses or haunted gardens, but there was no denying it now. Something was calling them. The house was no longer silent. It had a heartbeat. The next morning, before the sun had risen fully, Danielle was already in the backyard. A shovel in her hands, the grass wet with morning dew clung to her feet. She began to dig. Hour after hour she worked, sweat dripping into her eyes, her muscles aching. The dirt was stubborn, packed hard as stone. She didn't stop, not until her shovel struck something solid with a hollow clink. She dropped to her knees and used her hands to brush the soil away. A small tin box lay beneath the earth, rusted and corroded but whole. She opened it slowly. Inside were fragile, crumbling papers, notes, sketches, chemical formulas, and another letter. Her breath caught. "To whoever finds this," it began, the handwriting neat but trembling, "it means you've listened. It means you've seen. They took everything from us, but the truth remains. The formula is buried here. This garden was our hope. Finish what we started." It was signed E. Harp. Danielle pressed the letter to her chest, eyes burning with tears. This wasn't just about the house anymore, or surviving, or escaping debt. This was bigger. This was about Eli. This garden had been more than a garden. It had been a cure, a secret passed down through soil and sacrifice. Danielle didn't understand all the formulas, but she could feel the meaning. And for the first time in months, she felt hope. When the children woke, Danielle was already seated at the kitchen table, carefully copying the notes into a fresh notebook. Some pages were damaged, ink smudged, others torn. But she could see the shape of something whole. That day, the three of them worked outside together. The sun beat down hard, the air thick with heat, but none of them stopped. Eli tired quickly, but he helped, carried light things, pulled weeds. Maya moved silently beside her mother, her eyes always drifting back to the apple tree. "She says you're close," Maya whispered once. That evening they sat on the back steps, the garden glowing silver under the moonlight. The scent of wildflowers drifted in the breeze. "Tell me again," Eli said, his voice weak. "Why did you buy this house?" Danielle stared ahead toward the tree. "Because I was desperate," she answered. "Because I didn't know what else to do." Eli was quiet for a moment. "It's more than a house now," he said. Danielle turned her head sharply, but he was still looking at the tree. The next day, while Danielle was sweeping the front hallway, there came a knock on the door. Sharp, official. When she opened it, a man in a white buttoned shirt stood on the porch, holding a clipboard. He looked at her with a rehearsed smile. "You Danielle Brooks?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "John Bennett." "County Records Office," he said, like it was supposed to mean something. "There's been a mix-up, some confusion with the auction. Turns out this house might not have been legally up for sale." Danielle's stomach dropped. "That's not what they told me when I signed the paperwork," she replied, folding her arms. He gave a fake smile. "Things happen. Might be a legal challenge. I just thought you should know." He handed her a sealed envelope, then turned and left without another word. Danielle stood there in the doorway for a long time, the letter hanging from her fingers like a stone. That night, she didn't open it. She didn't need to. She had seen that letter 100 times before, just with different names, different threats, but the message was always the same. "You don't belong here." Inside, Eli rested on the couch, eyes half closed. Maya drew quietly. At the table, another picture of the house, but whole again. Bright. Outside, the wind moved through the weeds like whispered promises. The house creaked softly, like it was listening. They would try to take this from her, but this time, she wouldn't let them. That night, Danielle was awoken by the sound of soft footsteps. She rose quietly, heart thudding, and moved toward the hallway. The moonlight cast silver across the floor. At the end of the hall stood Maya, her eyes glassy, her voice a whisper. "She says we're almost there." Danielle knelt beside her daughter, pulling her into a warm, trembling hug. Her heart raced as she whispered gently, "Almost where, baby?" But Maya didn't answer. She simply laid her head on her mother's shoulder, closed her eyes, and whispered something soft before sleep took her again. "The truth is hiding in the soil." The days after the visit from the county records officer crawled by like thick gray clouds before a storm, heavy, slow, and full of warning. Danielle kept the official-looking letter folded on the kitchen table. She didn't open it. She didn't touch it. It felt like a loaded weapon, one she could pretend didn't exist if she just looked away. But deep down, she knew better. Trouble always found her. Each morning, she stepped outside with Maya. The two of them worked side by side in the garden, pulling weeds and cutting back the wild, choking vines. Together, they unearthed old stone paths hidden under years of dirt, like bones buried beneath skin. Eli helped when he could, his fragile body moving carefully through the brush. But the heat was merciless, and his strength faded fast. The heavy, summer air clung to him, and each breath looked harder than the last. Danielle watched him closely, the rise and fall of his chest, the sweat on his brow, the way his cough lingered longer now. Fear pressed on her like a second shadow, following her through every hour. And the nights? The nights were worse. Once, the sun fell, the house seemed to sigh under its own weight. Old beams creaked like tired bones. Danielle lay awake in her mattress on the floor, staring at the sliver of moonlight on the wall. Sometimes she heard slow, careful footsteps in the hallway, sometimes soft whispers, and always the feeling that someone, something, was watching. It wasn't just the house. The whole town had started to feel strange. At the market, people stared too long. At the gas station, conversation stopped when she walked in. On the sidewalks, neighbors looked through her like she wasn't even there. One afternoon, she stood in line at the pharmacy, clutching Eli's prescription slip and praying she had enough left in her bank account. She didn't, when it was her. Turn at the counter, she opened her mouth to ask for a smaller refill, but a voice behind her cut in. "You're the woman who bought the Harper place, aren't you?" Danielle turned to see a white woman with a tidy gray bun and polite eyes that didn't smile. "I am," Danielle answered cautiously. "Folks say that house is no good," the woman said quietly. "You be careful out there." Danielle nodded and turned back to the counter. She didn't trust herself to say a word. When she got back to the car, she found a folded piece of paper tucked under her wiper blade. Big. Black letters read, "You don't belong here." She crumpled it in her fist without a word and drove home with her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. That night, she sat at the kitchen table, the old notebook open again, its pages spread like wounded birds. The words blurred as her thoughts spiraled. Eli's medicine, the hate note, the silent stares around town. It was all connected. They wanted her gone. They didn't care how. Across from her, Maya sat drawing. Danielle looked up and caught her. Daughter sketching the garden again, but this time, something was different. In Maya's drawing under the apple tree, a small wooden box was buried beneath the roots. "She says it's almost ready," Maya murmured, eyes still on the page. Danielle didn't ask who she was. She already knew. The next day, Danielle cleared out the small tool shed behind the house. Her stomach dropped the moment she saw it. The lock was snapped, the latch bent and hanging, loose. Inside, tools were scattered. Pages of Harper's notes, her backup copies, were ripped, stomped on, some missing. She stood in the doorway, hands trembling, ears ringing. Someone had been here. That night, she locked every door and every window. She stacked pots and pans by the doors like makeshift alarms. Eli watched silently as she worked, worry etched in his tired face. Maya didn't say much either. Her eyes kept drifting toward the tree. A week later, a second letter arrived. This one bore a seal from the county office, and inside, it spelled things out clearly. There was a dispute over the auction. Procedural error. Improper notice. She had 30 days to leave. Danielle read the letter 3 times. Her hands shook by the end. They weren't just pushing her out. They were trying to erase her, just like they'd erased the Harpers. That night, long after the kids were asleep, she sat on the porch. The garden before her was tangled but alive, full of secrets and breath. The air was heavy, the scent of wet earth and wildflowers curling around her. She heard footsteps. Turned. It was Eli, pale and thin, leaning in the doorway. "Couldn't sleep," he whispered. She nodded and patted the spot beside her. He sat. "They're trying to make us leave," he said, barely above a breath. "I know," she said, voice hoarse. He stared at the garden. "But this house, it's not just wood and bricks." She looked at him, startled. He didn't look back. "She told me," he whispered. Danielle closed her eyes and pulled him into a hug. The next morning, she made a choice. She drove into town and walked into the library. It was small and smelled like old books and lemon polish. Behind the desk sat a sharp-eyed black woman with silver streaks in her hair. "You're the one living in the Harper place," she said. Danielle nodded. The woman didn't flinch. She gestured toward a chair. "Sit." Her name was Mrs. Carter, and she remembered everything. For an hour, Danielle told her the whole story, every whisper, every vision, every threat. When she finished, Mrs. Carter reached under the counter and pulled out a worn folder. "I saved these," she said. Inside were yellowed photos and old clippings. There they were, the Harpers, smiling faces, real people. A dream interrupted. "They tried to erase them," Mrs. Carter said. "They'll do the same to you." Danielle's throat tightened. "Then what do I do?" "You already have something." "They didn't," the old woman said. "You know how their story ended. But you can rewrite it." That night, Danielle returned home to find Eli slumped near the front door, drenched in sweat, his breathing fast and shallow, his lips faintly blue. She dropped beside him with a scream, propping him up, calling his name. Maya stood frozen, tears in her eyes. "He said he was fine," she whispered. Danielle grabbed his emergency inhaler, holding it to his mouth. It helped, but not much. She stayed by his side the entire night, holding his hand, whispering through her tears, her chest a storm of guilt and panic. By morning, his breathing had eased, but he was pale, still, weak. Danielle stepped onto the porch, head in her hands, the sky above her low and gray. They wanted her gone. They wanted the house. They wanted her son's life. But they weren't getting it. Not this time. She was staying. She would finish what the Harpers began. She would give her kids the life they deserved, and just as she lifted her head and looked across, the garden. The wind whispered again, faint but clear, a woman's voice dancing through the leaves. Almost there, Danielle sat hunched on the edge of the worn-out couch, her fingers gently brushing over Eli's burning forehead. She hadn't slept, barely moved, afraid that stepping away even for a second might mean losing him. His breathing rasped softly, rough and shallow, the sound haunting her ever since the night before. It clung to the air, just like the fear inside her chest. Across the room, Maya sat at the small kitchen table, quietly drawing in her notebook. Her pencil scratched across, the paper like a soft ticking clock in the silence. The unopened envelope from the county records office still lay on the table, the corners curling from the dampness in the air. Danielle hadn't touched it. She didn't need to. She already knew. They were coming, not just for her, but for the house, for whatever was hidden in its bones. By mid-morning, the sky darkened and rain began to fall, gentle at first, then hammering down like a warning. Danielle rose stiffly and stepped outside onto the porch. Rain poured over her face, washing away the sweat and the tears she hadn't let fall. Before her, the garden lay wild and soaked, but alive, full of secrets, full of purpose. She'd worked every day to bring it back. The tangled paths had started to reveal themselves. The herbs were pushing through the weeds again, and in the center the old apple tree stood tall, like it had always been waiting. Danielle whispered to herself, "Almost there," remembering Maya's words from days ago. When the storm cleared in the afternoon, she moved through the house like a woman chasing something she couldn't quite name. She checked every door, every window, her makeshift alarms of pots and strings still intact. But something was off. It wasn't fear anymore. It was pressure, heavy and tight, like they were closing in. That evening, she found herself staring at a wall near the stairs. A wall she'd passed 100 times, but now something seemed off. The wallpaper pattern didn't match. Her fingers moved across it, tugging gently until the paper peeled away, revealing a hidden wooden panel, small and old, with no handle. Only a tiny keyhole stared back at her. Her heart jumped. She ran to the pantry, digging into the old tin box where she'd hidden the Harper letters. There it was, the little brass key she'd forgotten. It slid into the lock, and with a soft click, the panel creaked open. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, newer than the others, and beneath it a sealed envelope. Danielle's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. "If you're reading this, then you've found what they tried to bury. We weren't meant to survive, but the truth remains. Inside this book is everything. The final formula, the proof, the names. Finish it. Tell the world." Danielle's breath caught. This wasn't just a family's journal, it was evidence. She opened the notebook. The pages were full. Diagrams, formulas, dosage instructions, results. She couldn't understand it all, but the message was clear. The Harpers had found something powerful, something healing, and someone had tried very hard to erase them. The back of the book, one final list. Names, politicians, doctors, county judges, people who still held power. Next to their names were notes: paid, threatened, silenced. Rain began to fall again, soft and steady. Danielle sat in the quiet kitchen, the notebook spread before her. She felt the weight of what she now held, and for the first time she truly understood. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about saving her children. It was about justice. The next morning, Danielle drove into town. First stop, the county archive. The clerk didn't ask questions, just handed over the Harper file. The pages were heavily blacked out. Case closed. No foul play, no remains. Next, the hospital. She asked for Dr. Ellis, one of the few who had been practicing long enough to remember. "Retired," the nurse said. Danielle left quietly. She passed the courthouse, the church, the bank, every building tied to the names in Harper's list. That night, she told the children everything. She showed them the notebook, the list. Eli, pale and tired, listened closely. Maya sat beside him, still and wide-eyed. "They want to take this away because they're afraid," Danielle said softly. Eli nodded. "So, what now?" She took a deep breath. "Now, we finish what they started." The following days blurred into one. Danielle spent her mornings researching, digging into online journals, nursing textbooks, anything that could help her make sense of the Harper formulas. She reached out to an old professor, someone she trusted. She didn't share everything, just enough. In the afternoons, she and Maya tended the garden, harvesting herbs, clearing space, marking the beds. The plants were still there, growing strong, healing. Every night she waited for the knock. It came 2 weeks later, just after midnight. One sharp, deliberate knock at the front door. Danielle opened it slowly. A man in a black suit stood outside. Tall, calm, dangerous. "You're Danielle Brooks?" She nodded. "I represent certain interests," he said smoothly. "We'd like to make you an offer. Generous. Much more than the house is worth." He handed her a business card. On the back, "This is your last chance." Danielle closed the door without a word. The next morning, the air felt heavier. She checked the locks, checked on the kids, sat on the couch just watching them breathe. Eli still looked tired, but his chest rose steadily. Maya's curls framed her peaceful face. "For them," she whispered. "Always for them." That afternoon, the county letter came again. Only this time it had a court date, a real threat. The judge's name? One from the Harper list. Danielle. Met Mrs. Carter at the library. She laid it all out, the files, the notebooks, the man on the porch. Mrs. Carter said only one thing. "They want control, and you've got the one thing they can't touch, the truth." That night, someone broke in. The kitchen window shattered, the front door splintered, drawers ransacked, papers missing. But the Harper notebook? Safe. Hidden. Danielle cleaned in silence. Maya's hands trembled. Eli watched, his eyes worried. "Are we leaving?" Maya asked softly. Danielle didn't hesitate. "No, we're not." That night she made a call. A lawyer named Ashley Morgan, a fighter, connected to Mrs. Carter, sharp, determined. "I'll be there tomorrow," Ashley said. "Bring everything." Danielle laid it all out. Letters, papers, copies. Every threat, every whisper, every night of fear. Ashley arrived, tall, fierce. No time for small talk. "We're going to give them something to be afraid of," she said. For a week, they built the case, filed motions, cross-checked files, found lies, found proof. Eli's health began to improve. Maya's drawings grew brighter. Even the house felt different, lighter, until another message arrived. Dead animal. Red paint across the front door. "Leave, Danielle." Didn't flinch. She just wiped it away. The court day arrived. Cold. Gray. Danielle sat beside Ashley in the courtroom. Across from her, men in suits. Names from the list, the judge, another name. Cold eyes, thin mouth. The hearing began. The county's lawyer claimed the sale was invalid. Ashley countered with evidence, letters, timelines. Then came the Harper notebook. The room shifted. "This," Ashley said, "is not just a document. It's the truth they buried, and we're unearthing it." She named names. The courtroom fell silent. The judge adjourned the hearing. No ruling. But an investigation was launched. That night, Danielle and Ashley sat on the porch. "They won't stop," Danielle whispered. Ashley nodded. "But they can't hide anymore." The next morning, a reporter showed up. Rachel Wren, national, smart, unrelenting. She promised to tell the whole story, and she did. Within days, the story spread. Headlines, videos, outrage. Black mother fights for home and history. County officials exposed. Soon after, Danielle received a letter. Not a threat. A recognition. Her ownership of the Harper house was upheld. Investigations opened. The fear didn't disappear. But it grew quieter. The whispers turned into noise that couldn't silence her anymore. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the garden glowed in gold and lavender, Danielle sat on the porch with her children beside her. They were still tired, still healing, but they were home, and together. They had changed everything. Almost there, she thought again. No longer a hope, but a promise fulfilled. Sometimes the most powerful change comes not from strength, but from refusing to be silenced. Danielle didn't just fight for a house. She fought for history, for healing, and for hope. When the world tries to erase your story, write it louder, speak up, stand tall, and never forget. The truth grows roots deeper than fear. If this story touched your heart, give it a thumbs up. To hear more powerful stories just like this one, hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss the next tale. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Danielle's place? Would you have stayed and fought?